Before he was a hero, he was just a kid from Brooklyn with a fire in his heart and too many reasons to quit. But he never did. Steve Rogers wasn't born strong. He wasn't fast. He wasn't intimidating. What he had, what made him different, was courage. The kind of courage that doesn't come from muscle or might, but from moral conviction, from knowing right from wrong, from standing up even when no one else would. In 1940, as the storm of World War II raged across Europe, America was preparing for the worst. The country needed heroes, and Steve Rogers wanted nothing more than to serve. But every recruitment office turned him away. As my heart murmurs, frailty. He was classified as 4F unfit for duty. Most would have stopped there, but not Steve. It was at an exhibition for future technologies that fate intervened. A mysterious man in a military coat overheard Steve pleading for a chance to fight not for glory, but for justice. That man was Dr. Abraham Erskine, the creator of Project Rebirth, a secret initiative to create the world's first super soldier. Steve was chosen not for his strength, but for his spirit. He may be weak now, Erskine told the generals, but inside, he is already the man we need. And so began the transformation. In a hidden facility beneath a Brooklyn armory, Steve Rogers underwent a revolutionary procedure. Injected with a serum and bombarded with Vita-rays, his body was rewritten, enhanced to the peak of human perfection. He emerged taller, stronger, faster. But before the world could celebrate, Hydra struck. A Hydra assassin sent by the Nazi science division, led by the terrifying Johann Schmidt, known as the Red Skull, infiltrated the facility. Dr. Erskine was killed, taking the secrets of the serum to his grave. Steve chased down the assassin, revealing his power to the world. But he wasn't met with medals or missions. Instead, the military relegated him to the USO, dressing in stars and stripes to sell war bonds. They called him Captain America, but it was a title without meaning until Steve made it one. When he learned his childhood friend James "Bucky" Barnes had been captured behind enemy lines, Steve went rogue. With nothing but a vibranium shield and pure resolve, he infiltrated a Hydra base alone, and came out with 400 rescued soldiers at his back. He was no longer a symbol, he was a leader. The Allies took notice. With Howard Stark's advanced tech, a new uniform, and a strike team known as the Howling Commandos, Captain America waged a war against Hydra across Europe. But with every victory came darker truths. Red Skull had used the Tesseract, a cosmic artifact of untold power, to build weapons that defied science. Hydra wasn't just fighting for domination, it sought annihilation. Steve knew the cost. He knew what it would take, and he never backed down. From a scrawny kid in a Brooklyn alley to the front lines of the deadliest war in history, Steve Rogers had become the embodiment of heroism, not because of his strength, but because of his sacrifice. But the war was far from over, and destiny was about to call him into the ice. The war had ended, but for Steve Rogers, it was as if no time had passed at all. The ice that had entombed his body for over 70 years finally released its grip. SHIELD scientists were stunned to find his body perfectly preserved, frozen in the North Atlantic since the end of World War II. To the modern world, Captain America was a legend, a myth, a symbol of a bygone era. But to Steve Rogers, it was just yesterday when he awoke. It wasn't in 1945. The world was no longer fighting Hitler or Hydra. It was the 21st century, a place of touchscreens, alien invasions, and heroes in iron suits. Steve found himself in a sterile hospital room, where the sounds of Glenn Miller playing over the radio tried to mask the truth. He broke out of the simulation, bursting into a chaotic Times Square, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the glowing billboards, the steel towers, and a world that had forgotten the man behind the shield. Nick Fury approached him not with a salute, but with a proposition. Steve was a relic, but also a necessity. The threats the world now faced were beyond anything the war had ever prepared him for. Gods from other realms, covert terrorist cells like the modern Hydra, and intelligence agencies whose motives were as murky as their secrets. SHIELD needed him, the Avengers Initiative needed him. But Steve's return was not without consequence. He carried guilt. The weight of Bucky's death haunted him, and the memory of Peggy Carter, now a frail woman in a retirement home, tore at his heart. He had survived, but everyone he'd loved had moved on or passed away. He was the man out of time, and the world had changed in ways he could barely comprehend. When Loki attacked Earth with the Chitauri army, It was Steve who stepped forward not as a relic, but as a leader. He donned the red, white, and blue once more, fighting alongside Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, Thor, Natasha Romanoff, and Clint Barton. Despite the friction and egos, it was Steve who rallied them. "There's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that." He wasn't the strongest or the most advanced, but he had the moral compass the team needed. The Battle of New York was the Avengers' first true test, and Steve led by example, leaping from buildings, coordinating defense, and putting himself in harm's way to save civilians. When the dust settled, the world knew the name Captain America once more, but Steve wasn't celebrating. The victory only emphasized his isolation. He walked the streets alone, a man searching for purpose in a digital age. His journey didn't end there. Uncovering the modern Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Winter Soldier shook Steve to his core. The organization he had once trusted was corrupted from within, and worse, his oldest friend, Bucky Barnes, was still alive, but brainwashed, weaponized, and known only as the Winter Soldier. Their confrontation was brutal, personal, and heart-wrenching. Steve didn't see an enemy, he saw a brother. "I'm with you till the end of the line," he said, and he meant it. Steve dismantled S.H.I.E.L.D., exposed Hydra, and walked away from institutions he could no longer trust. He no longer served orders blindly. He served ideals, freedom, truth, and loyalty. But these ideals would soon put him at odds with the very people he fought beside. When the Sokovia Accords were introduced, demanding that all heroes operate under government oversight, Steve refused. He saw control not as safety, but as a threat to personal liberty. It was the beginning of a Siscom civil war. Tony Stark, his friend and fellow Avenger, believed in accountability. Steve believed in choice, and between them stood Bucky, still hunted, still broken. Lines were drawn. Friends became foes. The Avengers fractured. And yet, through all the chaos, Steve never lost his resolve. Even stripped of his shield, hunted by the government, and labeled a fugitive, he continued to fight for what was right. Because to Steve Rogers, being Captain America was never about the title. It was about the man you chose to be when no one was watching. And in the shadows, new war brewed, one that would threaten not just Earth, but all of reality. Steve Rogers was a man out of time, but never out of duty. After the Battle of New York, the world hailed Captain America as more than just a war relic. He was now a symbol of global defense. But the modern world, filled with shifting allegiances and hidden agendas, would test his ideals more than any battlefield ever could. Living in Washington, D.C., Steve tried to adapt to a world he barely recognized. Technology, surveillance, drones, and the digital age clashed with his 1940s sense of honor and transparency. Still serving with S.H.I.E.L.D., he executed missions with efficiency, but doubts simmered. There was a darkness beneath the agency, a pristine exterior, a shadow he couldn't ignore. That shadow had a name: Project Insight, the discovery of a massive surveillance initiative capable of neutralizing threats before they even acted, shook Steve to his core. It wasn't freedom, it was fear weaponized. And at the heart of it all was a traitor Hydra, long thought dead, had infiltrated the highest levels of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the revelation was just the beginning. As S.H.I.E.L.D. unraveled from within, Rogers found himself branded a fugitive. His enemy wasn't just an idea, it was a ghost from his past. The Winter Soldier, ruthless, precise, unstoppable, and familiar. Behind the mask was James Buchanan Barnes, Bucky, his best friend, his brother, torn between his duty and his heart. Steve refused to kill Bucky. Instead, he fought to bring him back, to restore the man buried beneath decades of brainwashing and pain. It was no longer about defeating an enemy, it was about saving a life, reclaiming humanity from the hands of control and fear. With the help of Natasha Romanoff and Sam Wilson, Steve uncovered the full extent of Hydra's manipulation and brought down Project Insight, but at a great cost. S.H.I.E.L.D. collapsed, the world was left exposed, and Captain America walked away from the institution he once believed in. He would no longer be a soldier for anyone's agenda. As Hydra scattered and the Avengers reassembled, Steve began to question everything, not just the organizations around him, but the very concept of power unchecked. The age of secrets was over, and Captain America stood at a new crossroads between loyalty and liberty. But the world wasn't done asking for his shield. And the next war would not be fought with guns and uniforms, but with trust, betrayal, and the people he once called allies. When the dust of battle settles and the echoes of war fade, what remains is not always peace, but the burden of memory. Steve Rogers awoke in a world that had moved on without him. The skyline had changed, the people moved faster, the war was long over, but inside him, the battle never ceased. The man who had leaped into the ice to save millions had emerged into an unfamiliar future, a relic of a more black and white age, now stranded in a world painted in grays. The Avengers initiative brought purpose to his second life. Though displaced, he remained steadfast, a moral compass in a world spinning out of control. Fighting side by side with gods, monsters, and geniuses, Steve Rogers became more than a soldier. He became a symbol once again. But this time, the war was no longer against a single enemy. It was against deception, against corruption, against division. The Battle of New York, the rise of Ultron, the Sokovia Accords. Each moment tested his ideals. Each decision weighed heavier than the last. For Steve, the lines between friend and foe blurred. Trust, once unshakable, became fragile. And then came Bucky, haunted by the reappearance of the Winter Soldier. His best friend, now a ghost, molded by Hydra. Steve made a choice, to stand not with governments, not with laws, but with loyalty. "He's my friend," he told Tony. "So was I," Stark replied. The fracture between the Avengers was more than ideological, it was personal. Civil war erupted, not just between allies, but within Steve himself. But true to his core, he never stopped, fighting not for glory, but for what was right. Even when he dropped the shield, the very symbol of his identity, he remained Captain America in every way that mattered. When Thanos came, he stood tall once more, a broken man with unbroken resolve. He faced a god with only his fists and a fractured shield, and didn't flinch. And then, in one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history, the hammer lifted, worthy, flew into his hand, lightning crackled around him, and the world saw what many already knew: Captain America wasn't just a soldier, he was a legend. But Steve's final act wasn't one of war, it was one of peace. When given the chance to return the Infinity Stones and restore balance to the timeline, he took another path, a personal one. He went home, to the dance he never had, to the life he'd always sacrificed. He passed the shield, not just as a weapon, but as a legacy. To Sam Wilson, he entrusted more than metal. He passed on a symbol of hope, justice, and belief in a better tomorrow. Because being Captain America was never about super serum or star-spangled uniforms. It was about heart, about standing up when no one else would, about fighting for those who couldn't, about being the man who always did what was right, not what was easy. Steve Rogers lived 1,000 lifetimes in one, from the alleyways of Brooklyn to the battlefields of the cosmos. And though his story may have ended, his legend endures. Every soldier who protects the innocent, in every citizen who speaks out against injustice, in every heart that believes the world can still be better. He was more than a hero, he was the dream itself.